when you start to look at your foreign markets, you need to start to say, are these the same target consumers that I would have at home? And how do I need to communicate with them so that I can meet their needs, their values, and that I can address their priorities in the right way? First of all, it's really important not to assume that the things that work in your home market are going to work or be as successful in the market that you're looking to go into abroad. You need to analyze very carefully your own internal situation. Am I ready to go into export? Do I have the resources? Do I have the team? Or do I need to outsource some of that job? Then, of course, you need to do your market research and decide what is the best market for you as a small company, and you need to prepare a strategy. And then, of course, you need to go into the execution phase of that.
Welcome to the Powerful Marketing Tips podcast, created for overwhelmed business owners who want to build, run, and organize their marketing for good. And here's a brief overview of our guest. Have you ever dreamed of becoming successful internationally? Building a brand can be tricky to begin with, but what should you consider when you want to expand to other countries as well? Today's guest is Kathryn Read, who is an international sales and marketing consultant with over 25 years' experience developing niche products in emerging markets. She helps small and medium companies to break through international barriers in Europe and Asia, creating successful entrepreneurs and a thriving global marketplace with her consulting and mentoring. Kathryn firmly believes that business is done between people and therefore places her focus on building strong relationships that form a solid foundation for doing business. Well, settle in and enjoy the episode.
Hi friends, it is Marilis here and thank you for tuning in. Another great episode with an inspirational guest is about to start. But before we start, I have a favor to ask. Please go rate and review this episode to help us grow. It means a lot to receive your feedback, and it is the only way and the only thing that helps us become better and serve you better. So we appreciate your help here very much. And now, today's topic is enormous, as we are going to talk about starting to build an international brand. I am glad to welcome Kathryn Read with us, who has spent more than 25 years of expert doing business in more than 150 countries. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
We are very honored to have you with us. So please, Kathryn, share briefly your story with us. How did you find your way to the exporting world, so to say?
Well, I was actually originally a languages student, and I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do with my life, but I did like the idea of living abroad and traveling a lot. And one of the ways that I could prolong the time I spent in Austria, because I'm from the UK originally, I found a course at university, a postgraduate course at university in export and international business. And I thought, well, I'll do the course, and if I don't like it, then I can always do something else afterwards. And that's how I ended up in export. So it just worked out that I just really felt at home in the niche, and so everything began from there.
And you have been there for 25 years, and I know you have worked with some great brands. Please talk about those as well.
Okay, well, I started out in the automotive industry, working with a brand which is maybe not such a household name these days, Crossland Filters. But of course, we were delivering at that time, we were delivering to Ford. We were also delivering to companies like Aston Martin or Rolls-Royce or Volvo, also for heavy duty applications. So it was quite an industrial kind of environment. It was very male dominated. And I was dealing with Africa and Eastern Europe, because it was the late 90s, and Eastern Europe was also a kind of new frontier within Europe that my boss didn't really know those countries, and that was more my jam than to deal with Portugal or some of the other markets that he liked to work with. So that's how I started there. I did a brief stint with rubber stamps, which I actually didn't find that exciting. The people were nice, but I didn't find the product very exciting. And then I spent 18 years selling infant formula and baby food, which was a really nice time. And I had a really fantastic experience there. So that was a great learning curve for me. And the last 3 years I've been self-employed. So working with lots of food and beverage brands or other FMCG products, especially. And it's been, yeah, a lot of fun. Not always easy, but a lot of fun.
That's great. I can see and hear you have a lot of experience here. And please just briefly walk us through the countries you have worked with. I know we shouldn't list down all the 150 here, but I'd like to I'd like that our listeners could really understand, the which sides of the world you have worked.
Okay. When I started out in my career, I was working on all the parts of the world that my boss didn't want to deal with. So that generally meant my biggest markets were the Baltics and Israel, but I was also dealing with Africa, some parts of, or most parts of South America, and I was dealing with what's known as the French Overseas Territories. Those are all those nice islands like Reunion, Guadeloupe. All of those territories were also part of my sales area, which was quite nice. And when I was at HIP, then I started out with dealing with the Baltics. I've dealt with Scandinavia at various times, Southeast Europe, so former Yugoslavian republics, let's say, Turkey, Lebanon, and through to Asia. And that was my speciality at HIP, let's say. The last 15 years that I was at the company, then I was really focusing on Asia, and the last 10 years, especially on China. And that has been something that's very interesting from a business perspective, because, of course, China is quite a complicated market. It's a very specific market. And there are not so many people who, in the food and beverage space, have really focused on China, South Korea, and then Southeast Asia as well. So those are kind of my favorite markets to be doing business with. But I've done business in most places around the world over the years at different times. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. That's just amazing, Kathryn, really. So I'd really like to talk about starting to build an international brand today, but I would start with, you just mentioned so many different countries, and they are not just different by where they are located, but there is also a huge cultural difference,
Yes.
right? So please tell us, how did you work with different countries? Did you do some homework just to figure out, what are the, let's say, their norms, and how do they expect you to really communicate with them?
Yeah. I mean, now for sure, then I would do quite a lot of online homework. And of course, these days it's so much easier to find information online. When I very first started out, then of course there were a few books available, but a lot of countries, for example, the first business trip that I actually did on my own for Crossland was to Lithuania. And at that time, it was maybe 1995, something like that. There were no business books talking about that particular area of Europe. And it was somehow quite exotic for a lot of people because, it wasn't long after independence, and a lot of people had never visited there before now. So at that time, it was really quite a case of going and listening and observing really carefully. And when you found somebody that you had a little bit of a closer connection to, maybe you had some kind of, some people that you feel a closer chemistry to or something like that, that asking them questions, how do you do this, or what is polite in this situation, and just trying to learn and observe as much as possible. So I'm sure I made some really horrendous mistakes, but luckily when you come, as long as people can see that you're genuinely trying to do your best, then most people are quite acceptable of the fact that maybe you didn't realize that that's not so polite in their country, and they'll forgive you for some small errors along the way.
And that's the best way to learn, by doing mistakes.
Yeah. It's the best way to learn. Yes. And definitely, I had a client in Egypt, and she would tell me very directly if I did something that she would say, that's not very polite to do here, and I would be always like, oh, sorry.
That's great if they tell you,
Yeah,
that this is not polite. That's
but
you
of
should
course in
appreciate.
Asia, usually people don't tell you, and so Asia was much more of a. In Asia, I tried much harder to learn quite formally about how things should be done, and then to learn more by observation and asking questions and so on. So yeah,
So HIP is a very well-known brand. So I suppose I'm just guessing here that maybe it is easier to approach a new market with a very well-known brand
yes,
already. But when it comes
definitely.
to like a product or service that is not so big and not so well known, so where should one company really start when they think that okay, I'm doing great nationally, and I would really like to expand my business internationally. What are the first, I don't know, things they should do, or what are your suggestions?
I mean, I would say that first of all, it's really important not to assume that the things that work in your home market are going to work or be as successful in the market that you're looking to go into abroad. And so, what you do need to do is, first of all, you need to, just to summarize, you need to analyze very carefully your own internal situation. Am I ready to go into export? Do I have the resources? Do I have the team? Or do I need to outsource some of that job? Then, of course, you need to do your market research on and decide what is the best market for you as a small company who maybe doesn't have any brand awareness somewhere to go into, and you need to prepare a strategy. And then, of course, you need to go into the execution phase of that. So I think that it's important from the start that if you don't have any brand awareness abroad, or very little, that you're very clear what makes your company special. What is your USP? And you also, when you start to look at your foreign markets, you need to start to say, okay, how do my consumers think there? Are these the same target consumers that I would have at home? And how do I need to communicate with them so that I can meet their needs, their values, and that I can address their priorities in the right way? Because they potentially have very different priorities to the ones that my target consumers have in my home market, depending, of course, where I'm starting from.
Okay, so you have already said a lot of things, and I'd like to go into
Just,
details.
yeah, I wanted to just put the main points at the top, and
Very
then we
good.
can go into some details. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Let's do that, because just for the clarity, USP is unique selling point, right? So this is
Yes.
one thing I wanted to clarify for the listeners. But I got three things: analyze if I'm ready, market research, and execution.
Yes.
Huge, areas. So how should I really analyze if I am ready? You mentioned resources. What are the resources I should have when I'm, starting to thinking about going abroad?
Okay, for a small company, you need to start out with having the commitment of the management board or the owners to really go into export, because exporting can be a really good way for small companies to grow their business and their profitability, but it's not a quick fix. So it's something that they have to be committed to in order for it to work well, because you have to prepare that things are probably not going to go 100% according to plan. Maybe it takes a little bit longer than you expected it to. And you, of course, they also have to prepare some kind of a budget for you to be able to expand into a new market, because you need to do some marketing activities, you need to do some localization activities. And the other point is, do you have a team to do that? So do you have enough capacity in your team? And do the people that you have, do they have the right knowledge to do international trade? I mean, the guy in the warehouse, he's not going to be very happy if he suddenly has to pack your small export orders in something completely different and to go through some extra processes of inspections and doing documentation because you've decided you want to go into export. So you have to make sure that everybody is properly trained, or that you say, we can't do this technical part internally. We have to give that to an external provider, like a freight company, who can probably do all of that, those building blocks of the export paperwork, and that you concentrate on the marketing. But you still have to do the branding, and you still have to, even if you work with an external expert, you still have to provide the core knowledge about your products and your brand in order to adapt those for an international market.
So you need to be committed and you need right competencies. That's very good. But when it comes to, you mentioned branding many times. So oftentimes we don't have those huge,
Budgets.
budgets, right, for that.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts here? And I'm sure you have many experiences here. What is the best way to do that? Because in order to really be on top of somebody's head, right, you need to do a lot of work, and it takes, again, time and commitment, as you just mentioned. So let's talk about branding a little bit here, because it is so much aligned with the sales and everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to, on the one hand, look at the culture of the country that you're looking to expand into, because it's not just what are their preferences for the kinds of products and services. Because if you have 100 products in your portfolio, maybe only 10 of those are suitable for the beginning in a new market. So you first of all need to look at which kind of products you're going to go with, and which kind of content the consumers in that market like to consume. Because, for example, especially in the B2B space, there are some markets where if you come with a white paper, then that's the perfect way of delivering some kind of technical B2B content. But for other markets, maybe you want to come with a video that delivers the same kind of content, but in a different format. So you have to, on the one hand, think about what kinds of content are suitable for the market. Can you take over some of your content from your domestic market and just localize that, which might mean, it probably means translating to some extent, but it also means changing, because localization is not just translating everything word for word. You know yourself, marketing copy is probably the hardest thing to translate so that it comes across authentically for a foreign audience. So you have to deal with the content factor. You have to also consider which channels you're going to use to deliver your content. For example, if you want to go to China, then you don't have any options of Facebook and Instagram and so on. You have to go completely onto Chinese channels such as Bilibili or WeChat. And whilst the content might be quite similar, you might need a short video. That might be the best way to deliver your message, but you have to deliver it in a different format. And the most basic thing, if you don't have such a huge budget, of course, is to localize your website. Because according to the so-called underwear effect, that's a really nice study that you can look for. Consumers are more inclined to buy more if a website is, and the information associated with it is available to them in their local language. So things like dates and currency and product sizing, for example, in the clothes industry is always a critical one. But it's really important to have it available in the local language. That would be the kind of very bare minimum that you can do, that doesn't actually necessarily need such a huge budget, but which you do need to get done professionally. It's not just something that you can just use Google Translate for to localize your website. You need to have professional support on that.
Yeah, that's very good, and you should definitely do some homework here because it really helps you to save a lot of time and money and frustration at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I think that
Hmm.
it's really true to say that the more research that you can do upfront of any kind of internationalization project, the more time it's likely to save you
Hmm.
later. Because
Hmm.
if you have that knowledge in house, or if you have the budget, of course, if you can buy that information into house, it saves you making the mistakes that other people have already made 5 times.
Hmm. I agree. And you also mentioned a very important detail is that when you approach the other country and culture, they might not even use the same channels as you are
Yes.
using, right? So the Bilibili and WeChat and the other platforms that they are using are not so familiar to people in Europe and in the States, for example, right?
Exactly. But when you say
Mm-hmm.
to them, short video format, then everybody can understand something under that these days, or at least
Mm-hmm.
every marketer
Mm-hmm.
knows what to understand under. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
you need a short video format,
Mm-hmm.
um, and the fact that you need to adapt the exact way of the delivering the messaging. That is something that I think most people can understand. That you appreciate things differently from one country to the next. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
from the
Mm-hmm.
UK, we have quite different understanding, even of some words, if you compare us to a US audience, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you can really get into some hot water if you have the wrong vocabulary on those kind of things.
I know, I know. Trust me, I've been there. Because English is not my first language. But okay, so we have talked about branding briefly. So I'd like to touch the sales part as well, because when I'm analyzing if I am ready, I should definitely think about sales, or I think we are thinking about that. But how should one really approach sales very professionally, meaning that I'm just not going there and hoping for the best, right? I should really build already some networks there or some relationships with local, I don't know, organizations maybe, with a chamber of commerce, or what are your, I don't know, best practices here?
I think it's important that you go systematically into any market. So I often, especially a lot of small companies, I see them doing what I would call ad hoc export. And they say,
Mm-hmm.
well, we got an inquiry from Australia, but when we actually looked at it, it was too expensive. And so we decided that we can't export at all. And actually, they probably could export, but they need to have a system behind it. So,
Mm-hmm.
like you mentioned, you need to decide from a sales perspective how you're actually going in to enter into the market, how your product's going to get from your factory or your warehouse to the consumers. And for a lot of, you could, of course, these days, you could, of course, sell directly online, but that often brings with it certain issues about taxes, and it can get a little bit complicated with customs duty and so on. You have the opportunity that you could go, depends on the kind of product you have, but you could list directly with retailers in the United Arab Emirates, for example, and you could list in Carrefour, and you could list in Spinneys, and you can list in all of those retailers. And that's also an option. But for a small player, it's probably also not a good option, because then you've got a lot of work to do to deal with all of them. And of course, you can work with a partner such as a distributor, an importer, or maybe an agent who doesn't buy the products, but they sell in your name. Those are all good opportunities. And of course, things like trade fairs are a good place for building your network. Um, Many countries have an overseas trade organization who support
Mm-hmm.
the companies who are looking to expand abroad with information and resources. So, for example, if you go to your trade commissioner in Malaysia, they may be able to say to you, this is a good customs agent, this is a reliable accountant, lawyer, all of those kind of technical people that you might need on occasions to support you with your business, and that they can often also give you lists of potential distribution partners, or they can give you information about the regulations and the technical requirements for entering into a particular market with the products that you have.
Mm-hmm. And I would be very careful here with only Googling, because you may find, those distributors and agents and people who, they say that they are ready to help you in the certain market, but you should really do more, your homework to make sure that they are reliable
Yes.
agents, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
let's say what I quoted it somewhere a couple of weeks ago. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog,
Mm-hmm.
There's a meme, I think it's from the New Yorker, from many years ago, that on the internet, you don't really know who's on the other side of the screen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so you have to do your due diligence. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
ideally, if you're entering into a new market, then you should always visit that market before you actually enter into it. And if you're looking to work with any kind of partner, you should try and visit them at their offices. I've heard some awful stories of people going and discovering that the office was obviously just rented from they've just borrowed it for the afternoon from somebody else. They've just put like a piece of paper that's been printed, that they've printed out on a cheap printer on the door that says this is the company name and so on. So it really pays to go and to look in person. I mean, the company I worked for originally, we were also scammed by a guy who went from from Latvia in Estonia, actually. Sorry. It's the only scam.
You were scammed by Estonian?
I was scammed by an Estonian, yeah, in my first job.
That's a bad thing. Oh, no, I am sorry. Oh my God.
But, this guy, he left the company that we were working with. And he was our contact person, and he sent us a letter on the official letterhead of the original company that we were working with, and told us that the company name had been changed to something different. And actually he'd moved companies, and basically in this way he kind of almost took the business with him. So yeah.
Wow, I'm really sorry for that. but yeah, Estonian or not Estonian,
it can happen anywhere. Yeah, exactly. It can happen anywhere. And if you often, you just don't know what you don't know. So if you're starting out, then it really pays to ask around. Maybe there are people in your network who've already exported into that country. Or maybe if you say, for example, if you are a sportswear company, maybe you can look around and see, okay, well, there's an outdoor equipment supplier who I know is a good company. Maybe I can reach out to them and ask who they are working with in that company. Somebody who's in a complementary field, but not a direct competitor of mine, obviously, because I don't want to work with a distribution partner who's working with a competitor's product. So I think there are lots of ways that you can check out. It's always best to get some kind of personal recommendation. I had an instance once where I was looking for a partner in South Korea, and I had a short list of 3 companies, and 2 of them told me that they were working with one confectionery company. And when I actually called the company to get the reference in, both of them had been on the short list, but only one of them was chosen. And he already knew at the time when he told us that he was working with this company that he wasn't. So, again, he was relying on the fact that we wouldn't do the due diligence up front.
So it really is risky to just, to go to some country and not do your homework very properly. We have a saying that you should measure, 7 times a cut 1 time.
Yes. Yes. Austria too. Yes.
Yeah. So I believe it's very valid here. And right now, I still believe that even if you think that, oh my God, it takes so much time, to really analyze, the resources, the branding, sales, I don't know, local taxes, culture, everything. But I still believe that this is so worth it. And from my own experience, I can say that the best way to learn this very quickly is really to just go there. Just take some time, even a few weeks, be there, just travel around, visit some networks, some local organizations, ask for help, tell them that, oh, I love your country, I would love to do some business
Yes.
here. What are your thoughts? Just make sure that you get many, I don't know, you meet many people, you actually can talk to people who know how to build business locally, and they can give you so good, advice and insights.
Not only that, but I think that by going to other countries and seeing what is successful in other countries, be it analyzing your competitors, how are they getting good sales in that country, then it makes you more innovative. It makes you more competitive in your home market because it broadens your mind about ideas about what you could do with the product and with the business.
Yeah, that's very good, of course. So you can have so much great ideas. Just go there to spend some time with the real people, local people there, and that's amazing how much you can learn. But I'd like to talk about differences in, when it comes to selling your services to another country, because we have mostly, talked about like physical things.
Yeah.
But when it comes to offering your services abroad, what are the things you're doing differently, or what you're doing, beside the things we talked about when it comes to selling services to different countries?
I think for selling services, you have to establish very clearly upfront your authority in your field of specialization. And so I think that a lot of this is to do with building a personal brand, maybe, whether you would call it a personal brand or your company brand, but building your online presence, I think, is these days really very important for selling services internationally. Because if you can show or showcase your expertise, be that on platforms such as LinkedIn or by appearing on podcasts as a guest, by being asked to participate in summits, or by being maybe a speaker in your chamber of commerce, because a lot of chambers of commerce are international chambers of commerce at international events, then you're showing that you are a competent person who is able to advise on whatever is your topic, be it marketing or consulting, executive training, whatever it happens to be. And I think that if you're selling services, it becomes even more important to be able to show good reference projects. It becomes very important also for you to build the relationships, because if you're selling services, somehow the relationship stands even more in the foreground of any kind of contract than it does if you're selling product. I mean, I always tell clients they shouldn't embark on a long-term distribution contract, for example, with someone that they couldn't bear to have dinner with. But I think if you're selling services where you're going to be working very closely with somebody on it's somehow a more personal level than just, will you sell the socks that I produce, if you're working with them to work on their brand, it's much closer to the core of their business if you're selling them services. So it's so much more important that the relationship has to be very solid. And of course, for some markets, especially in Asia, you need to spend a lot of time to build those relationships. Yeah.
I think that's the main difference, because it requires a lot of trust, as you just mentioned, and it takes so much time to really build that trust, because I may know you, I may even like you, but it doesn't mean I really trust you, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or
Mm-hmm.
you may like me, but because you've never worked with me and I'm
Mm-hmm.
far away, you're not sure if it's one thing to just exchange ideas online somehow. It's another thing to send me your money and
Mm-hmm.
expect me
Mm-hmm.
to achieve results for you.
Mm-hmm. And from my own experience, I can say that the best way here is really just to put yourself out there, to be genuine, to be to be available, to be ready to really answer any questions people may have, and you need to be ready to give value without any
Yes.
expectations. So
Yes.
that's
You
the
need to
main
have a lot
thing.
of conversations which
Mm-hmm.
are where you don't go into it with any kind of prepared idea
Mm-hmm.
that you're going to sell something, but simply just for the value of the conversation
Mm-hmm.
itself, to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
you should just build those meaningful relationships, and as soon as people, see the value and they really start trust you, then they want to spend time with you. So, what I have experienced myself is that if you're being accessible for the people, they really appreciate that, because they see that you're willing to give your own time for them, and
Yes.
just by just being there with them and helping them. It's something that anybody don't do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's not something that can be taken for granted these days, of
Mm-hmm.
course. So,
Oh my God, yeah, I just love this discussion here, and I see that it's there is so much to do when it comes to really the thinking if I should go abroad, because I have like some notes here, and as I'm checking them right now, I see that behind every word here is a huge work actually. There
yes.
is We mentioned branding, sales, we mentioned those resources and team,
Hmm.
but
We didn't talk about values. We didn't talk about how you might want to position yourself as a brand versus what actually the market really needs.
mhm,
We didn't
mhm.
talk about differences in technical and legal standards. We didn't talk about following trends and how they can be
Oh
different
my
in different
God.
countries. I mean, there's just, I think we could talk for days.
So that's why I'm a little bit worried how to really wrap it up for our listeners, because I think that even the legal side of this can be so tricky, and
Yes.
and it is so hard really to even to start to understand this. And the second thing, what we also mentioned, is to make sure that you will get a right partner, locally, for
Yes.
and how to be sure with that. So it is very complicated area where you are actually
Yeah.
every day. So please tell us, where should people find more information about what you do, and how can they contact with you? Because I'm sure they need to do that if they want to go abroad.
Well, I can be contacted via my website, which is kathrynread.com, simply my
Mm-hmm.
name. If you are interested in finding different ways of selecting which markets would be the right ones for you to go into,
Mm-hmm.
there is a free ebook there that you can download that goes through it lists some of the criteria and some ways of doing some selection methods so that you're making a data-based decision as to where you should expand your business into. And what
Mm-hmm.
you also do find on there are a lot of long form blog posts, and I do write quite long blog posts about different aspects of international expansion. So you can find things on there about the craft of exporting, and such as different things you should consider when you think about which payment terms to use. You can find those kind of things, how to localize your brand, which language service providers to choose what's selection criteria, those kind of things, but also about different markets. So you can find, if you want to enter the food and beverage market in Malaysia, you can find those kind of information as well. So
Wow, it sounds very useful.
it's a lot of information on there, and I'm also easily connected or contacted via LinkedIn. So
I think that's the best way to start,
yeah.
This analyzing how to really approach different markets. So if you were to wrap it up for our listeners here today, because I don't want to overwhelm them with, there is so much to do. What are the, 3 main things they should start with right now if they're thinking, okay, I want to really start a business abroad?
I would say do your research. You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because going abroad is going to be a learning curve. So it's something you have to get used to. And just when you think you've got used to it, you kind of enter a new level and it gets uncomfortable again. And don't be afraid to reach out for support, because there are people out there, there are organizations who will help you for quite reasonable fees. A chamber of commerce is usually not such an expensive thing to join, and you can get a lot of basic information there. There are many experts such as myself who can help you with finding partners, but reach out, get support, ask people. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I think those are the most. And go into it looking to enjoy the ride, as it were, because you have to stay open-minded and you have to go into it with pleasure, because otherwise it's going to likely fail, I would say. If it's just a nasty obligation, then I would leave it.
I agree. And I put the quote, get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's very good, because I think every business owner should be comfortable with being uncomfortable, right?
That's where the growth is, isn't it? It's like with the pearl and the pearl inside an oyster shell, that it needs to have that little bit of rubbing. It needs to be that little bit of irritation in order for you to grow something beautiful.
I agree.
Yeah.
So that is powerful, and I really think that if anybody who's listening to that right now thinking, okay, I'd like to have this discussion, about spreading my business to an international level, then they should contact you, just to meet you, because you have so much experience around this. And I think this would be the best first step here for somebody who don't know where to start.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always happy to have chat and to point people in different directions. Yeah.
Perfect. So last but not the least, Kathryn, please share and comment, a song that always inspires you to take action.
Well, the song that I've chosen is actually 50 years old. Or actually, it's older than that, but the recording of it that I think I sent you a link of is 50 years old. And the song is called Flying Home, and it's a very typical tune which is played by Benny Goodman, because I am also a hobby clarinetist, so I can only aspire to play something of that kind of standard. And it's just something that's a very good feel-good kind of happy music. And this particular recording of it he made with a vibraphone player who's from my hometown in the UK. So that's has some kind of sentimental connection for me. That makes it kind of special. Yeah.
That is beautiful, really, Kathryn. And please comment and share a quote also that empowers you.
So the quote that I've chosen is from Madeleine Albright, who I think was a very inspiring lady who didn't have such an easy life. She was a refugee from the Czech Republic during the Second World War to the US. And of course, then she was in a very powerful position as being the person in charge of foreign policy for the US. So the quote that I've chosen is, when we're trying to solve difficult issues, it's sometimes necessary to talk to adversaries as well as to friends. things we should think about at the moment. Historians have a word for this, and it's diplomacy.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God, that is powerful, especially today.
Especially today, yes.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you. I've never heard this quote or saying by Madeleine Albright. That's amazing. Well,
it's
thank
a very
you,
nice
Kathryn.
one. Yes.
Yeah, thank you again for your time and your sharing your thoughts and some ideas here. And I really wish you all the best. Thank you for coming to our podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that's all we've got for this episode of the Powerful Marketing Tips podcast. But make sure to link up with us at our free monthly international mastermind event. Just go to powerful-marketers.com/mastermind. We would really appreciate it if you would rate this podcast and leave a comment wherever you tune in to listen. That will help us and other potential new listeners. Until next time.